Let me begin with a story. I love languages, and above all, I love my mother language, Polish. So I keep a diary with words that I learned while reading. It's full of very niche and old words that rarely pop up in a conversation. One of these days, I stumbled upon a very nice sounding word that amazed me from the start. It was a palimpsest. That was the spark that ignited the flame and led me on this journey, and I would like to take you along with me. What is a palimpsest? Originally, it was parchment or papyrus used in the ancient times in the Middle Ages, from which the original writing has been scraped off in order to make space for new information. In other words, a very old method of recycling. The main causes for that were scarcity of writing materials and general frugality, which also meant that along with the new discoveries and spreading of mass-produced paper, there was no practical reason to make physical palimpsests anymore. One of the many fascinating qualities of a palimpsest is its resurrecting quality, which, ironically, was probably never considered at the time. With today's technology, we can scan the ancient manuscripts and discover what has been erased, but not totally lost, thus bringing them back to life, so to speak. The only existing copy of Archimedes' method of mechanical theorems was found by scanning a 13th century prayer book that turned out to be a palimpsest containing the long-lost text of one of the greatest ancient mathematicians. I must confess, I find this topic fascinating, not because I'm a fanatic of old manuscripts, but due to how widely this analogy can be used. Perhaps you'll find one of the metaphorical meanings useful in your daily life. Finding palimpsests in unpredictable places can prove very enjoyable. It also has social benefits. I have friends that, to this day, share a palimpsest with me, if they happen to find it, and then we dive into a discussion about it. Because palimpsests are never really straightforward. Ambiguity is in their nature. The history of a palimpsest doesn't end with the era of mass-produced paper. On the contrary, this is where its metaphorical meaning came to life. You might be surprised just how many concepts can one word influence. In geology, for instance, palimpsest is a feature composed of superimposed structures created at different times. For an astronomer, palimpsest is an ancient crater that has been degraded over time. For an archaeologist, this term is used to signify a multi-layered historical landscape. There seem to be countless different understandings of a palimpsest in modern science and art, so much so that there are even inconsistencies in the various definitions. One of the most common and widespread concepts is the palimpsest of the mind, according to which no memory is fully erased from human mind, but remains there, hidden somewhere. And yet, in medicine, palimpsest refers to a short-term memory loss caused by alcoholic intoxication. How to envision a palimpsest in its metaphorical sense? I would like you to focus your attention on the table over here, in these two materials. An old red tablecloth and an intricate crocheted white doily. To bring some novelty into your dining room, you order this handmade art online, and then you put it on top of your red tablecloth. What you did right there is a whole new design. There's a constant inner layer, fragments of red peeking through, and an outer layer. A palimpsest can work very similarly, and that's perhaps the easiest way to envision a palimpsest in its metaphorical sense, not as a two-layered manuscript. You might be aware that most of the biggest art museums also work to preserve the paintings in their collection and restore them to their former glory with intricate and precise procedures. Before the restoration process begins, however, the canvas is being scanned with an X-ray scanner, which can sometimes reveal unexpected elements, such as a vivid background that has been painted over, a different pose, or even an entirely different person that is missing from the final version of the painting, which is exactly what happened with Pablo Picasso's Les Deux Frères. Was it a conscious choice to create different layers and hide the face of the third brother for the next generations to discover? However intriguing that would seem, it's also very unlikely. But it doesn't change the fact that even if not created deliberately, such an example of a palimpsest shows us the creative process of an artist, something that's not usually visible at the first sight, therefore creating layers of meaning. How to envision a palimpsest in the non-physical arts, such as literature or music? In the second half of the past century, especially in the 70s and the 60s, literary critics and researchers have been deliberating a concept of intertextuality brought forward by a Bulgarian-French literary critic, Julia Kristeva. This term is incredibly wide, and it applies to every form of a relationship between two texts. Scholars didn't miss the connection between this new theory and a very old method of reusing parchments, also functioning as a metaphor for layered meaning. If you want to understand this complex relationship between works, think of what might connect Homer's Odyssey with Virgil's Aeneid. Both of them are epic ancient poems about the travels of a mythic hero. Some even say that the Aeneid is the Odyssey, written from the Roman perspective. What about the Odyssey and James Joyce's Ulysses, where both works are separated through time, language, and genre, and yet the Irish author of The Dubliners and Finnegan's Wake has rewritten the adventures of Odysseus in modern Dublin? Do any of the aforementioned works plagiarize each other? Or are they just examples of a culture of influence where it's almost impossible to ignore the legacy of the artists before us, therefore creating layers of artistic illusion? Perhaps the most abstract meaning of a palimpsest you can find refers to a musical work. Intertextuality in music is not a topic that has been incredibly well researched, and there are even less, close to no resources mentioning palimpsest as a compositional practice. I think it's a very interesting topic, and as a music scholar, I can propose my very own theory of a musical palimpsest. I understand it as a composition heavily influenced by a very specific different work, and yet still exhibiting individual creative elements. Ironically, the easiest way to understand it is perhaps through a physical metaphor. I would like you to focus your attention again on the table right here. We have two layers creating one design. Each of these layers is playing a vital role in the new creation. A musical palimpsest can work very similarly, although discovering it can be very dialectic. It is easier to see what a musical palimpsest isn't before grasping what it actually can be. It isn't a whole new genre, like a symphony or a sonata. It's also not variations, but with a fancy name. And we definitely shouldn't assume that it's plagiarism. What is it then? Perhaps the most famous phenomenon, and an example of this, is Luciano Berio's very postmodern Sinfonia, which has been constructed with little pieces of borrowed music, like a compositional patchwork. The piece in question has one constant, one skeleton of sorts, which is the accompaniment of Gustav Mahler's Second Symphony. It resembles the red tablecloth, hidden at parts, but still there, sometimes just peeking through the intricate design of the musical quotations that create the diverse melody, just like that crocheted doily. Who's the author of this work? Mahler or Berio? Which element is more important, the original bottom layer or the new top layer? Palimpsest is hardly the only thing you can think of that has layers. Perhaps the first things that came to your mind just now were cake or lasagna, or even an onion if you're particularly fond of the movie Shrek. Sometimes layers are there to protect what's inside, or to eliminate everything but the truth. It might sound drastic, but one of the ways that the infamous German Enigma ciphering system has been decrypted is through putting two sheets with possible sequences on top of each other and gradually limiting the possibilities according to given data. palimpsest, however, has countless of different solutions, and there is no right answer. The musical and an artistic process doesn't follow a designated path, and there's no truth at the end of it, just a piece of art. It can be made regarding or disregarding the rules of a certain style, but I don't think it's ever simply right or wrong. How do I use the palimpsest metaphor in my daily life? By understanding this model of layered meaning and the constant paradox of erasing and resurrecting, we can also create a certain attitude, a life approach. It is vital to remember that the surrounding reality has countless and countless layers of meaning that we couldn't possibly be aware of. Among other things, it is our cognitive limits that differ us from machines. And yet, it wouldn't be a palimpsest if the layers didn't present themselves. The palimpsest attitude involves the search for something more, and more importantly, the awareness that our knowledge is never complete, just as the Socratic "I know" that I know nothing. How can I use the palimpsest attitude in my daily routine? I think it's an especially good tool for young researchers who are still finding their way between studying what fascinates them and respecting the needs and limits of their field. While graduating with a master's degree might not equal being an expert in a certain field, young researchers should also feel empowered to experiment and explore. The key to the palimpsest attitude is the perfect balance between humility and curiosity. I would like you to think back to the story I told you about at the very beginning. It's an example of the palimpsest attitude in a nutshell. If I lacked the humility, thinking that my level of Polish is high enough, I would have never learned all the fascinating words I did. On the other hand, if I lacked the curiosity, I would have read the word palimpsest once and then continued to read, not making an effort to expand my knowledge. Does curiosity have an expiration date? What do you think? We might say that kids are famous for asking questions and adults are famous for answering them. Circling back to the idea of the palimpsest of the mind, we might say that, in parts, we're still the same kids we were before. We might know the answers to some questions, but think of all the possible subjects we could raise if we remained as curious as we were before. If curiosity were as common every day as breakfast or checking the weather. And it doesn't have to amount to anything great, at least not now, not at the first sight. Why don't you think of your days as manuscripts? My first layer happened when I read the word palimpsest in a book, and then started wondering what it might mean. The next layers happened over time, as I was discovering more about this fascinating subject that seemed to be expanding the more I knew about it. Perhaps this talk today will be your first layer of the manuscript. What will happen tomorrow? Thank you.